The blood on Felicity Ramsey's hands was still warm when she realized she had to run, not from what she had done, but from what would come next. She had shot her own cousin in self-defense, after he tried to drag her back across the disputed ridge that separated Ramsey land from Kincaid territory, the same ridge that had claimed the lives of 17 men and women over the past 40 years. The year was 1879, and Silver City, New Mexico territory was barely holding together under the weight of two families who hated each other more than they loved peace. Felicity was 22 years old, auburn-haired and green-eyed, with the kind of beauty that made men forget themselves until they remembered who her father was. She had grown up hearing stories about the Kincaids, about how they were thieves and murderers, about how they had killed her grandfather over a water dispute back in the 1840s, when this territory was still part of Mexico. She had been taught to hate them the way she had been taught to read and write, as something fundamental to her existence. Now she was running toward their land, because it was the only direction her cousin's friends would not expect. The ridge was steep and covered with juniper and piñon pines, the air sharp with their scent as she climbed. Her dress caught on branches and rocks, tearing at the hem, but she did not slow down. Behind her she could hear shouting. They had found Thomas's body. She had maybe an hour before they organized a hunting party. The sun was setting behind the Pinos Altos range, painting the sky in shades of orange and red that reminded her of fire. Her lungs burned as she crested the ridge and started down the other side, into Kincaid territory, into land she had been told since childhood would be her grave if she ever set foot on it. She made it perhaps a quarter-mile before she saw him. He was standing beside a stream, washing his hands, and he was the largest man she had ever seen. He had to be at least 6 feet 4 inches tall, with shoulders so broad they blocked out the dying light. His hair was dark brown and hung past his collar, and even from a distance she could see the muscles in his forearms as he splashed water on his face. He wore buckskin pants and a dark shirt with the sleeves rolled up, and there was a rifle leaning against a nearby tree. Felicity froze, her hand instinctively moving to the pistol at her waist, the same one that had killed Thomas. But before she could decide whether to run or fight, the man turned and looked directly at her. His eyes were dark blue, almost gray, and they studied her with an intensity that made her feel exposed. He did not reach for his rifle. He simply stood there, water dripping from his hands, watching her. "You are a Ramsey," he said. His voice was deep and rough, like stones grinding together. "And you are a Kincaid," she replied, trying to keep her voice steady. "I am Dalton Kincaid." He took a step toward her, and she could see now that his face was weathered from years in the sun, with a strong jaw and a scar that ran from his left eyebrow to his cheekbone. He looked to be in his late 20s, perhaps 30 at most. "What are you doing on my family's land?" "Running," she said honestly, because there seemed no point in lying to a man who could snap her neck with his bare hands. "From what?" "From what I did. From what they will do to me when they catch me." Dalton's eyes narrowed. "What did you do?" "I killed my cousin Thomas. He tried to force me to go back when I was trying to leave. He put his hands on me and I shot him." She lifted her chin defiantly. "I would do it again." For a long moment Dalton said nothing. Then he walked over to his rifle, and Felicity's hand tightened on her pistol. But he simply picked up the gun and slung it over his shoulder. "How long before they come looking for you?" he asked. "Maybe an hour, maybe less. Then we need to move. They will track you to the ridge and assume you kept going north. We will go east, deeper into the mountains." He started walking, then paused and looked back at her. "Unless you would rather take your chances with your family." Felicity stared at him. "Why would you help me? Our families have been killing each other for 40 years. 43 years, Dalton corrected. Your grandfather killed my great-uncle over grazing rights in 1836. My grandfather killed your uncle in 1847. Your father killed my father in 1863. His voice was flat, reciting facts rather than grievances. "I was 16 when I watched your father put a bullet in my father's chest over a property line that neither of them had legal claim to. I have spent the last 14 years asking myself what the point of all this death is, and I still do not have an answer." He turned and started walking again, his long strides eating up the ground. Felicity hesitated for only a moment before following him. What choice did she have? They walked for hours through the darkness, Dalton navigating by moonlight and instinct through terrain he clearly knew intimately. Felicity struggled to keep up, her dress catching on brush and her boots sliding on loose rocks. Dalton did not slow down or offer to help her, and she was grateful for that. She did not want his pity. Finally, when the moon was high overhead, they reached a small cabin tucked into the side of a mountain. It was well hidden, surrounded by tall pines and accessible only by a narrow path that would be easy to defend. "I built this place 5 years ago," Dalton said as he pushed open the door. "No one knows about it except me. You will be safe here." The cabin was simple but well made, with a stone fireplace, a bed in one corner, a table with 2 chairs, and shelves lined with supplies. Dalton lit a lantern and the warm light revealed more details: furs on the floor, books on a shelf, a Dutch oven hanging beside the fireplace. "You live alone up here?" Felicity asked. "Most of the time. I have a room at my brother's house in Silver City, but I prefer the mountains." He moved to the fireplace and began building a fire with practiced efficiency. "There is water in the barrel by the door. There is bread and dried meat in the tin on the shelf. Help yourself." Felicity realized she was starving. She had not eaten since breakfast, and her hands were shaking as she found the tin and pulled out some of the supplies. The bread was dense and good, the meat seasoned with salt and pepper. She ate standing up, watching Dalton as he got the fire going. Even in the dim light, she could see the power in his body, the way his muscles moved under his shirt as he worked. He was built like a man who had spent his life doing hard physical labor, all broad shoulders and strong arms, and a back so wide it seemed to fill the cabin. His hands were large and calloused, scarred from work and fighting. When the fire was crackling steadily, he stood and turned to face her. "You can have the bed. I will sleep on the floor. This is your home. I cannot take your bed. You have been running through the mountains all night. You need the rest more than I do." His tone made it clear this was not a discussion. Felicity wanted to argue, but her body was already betraying her, exhaustion making her sway on her feet. "Thank you," she said quietly. Dalton nodded and began pulling furs from a chest in the corner, making himself a bedroll on the floor in front of the fireplace. Felicity sat on the edge of the bed, suddenly aware of how close they were, how alone they were. This man was her enemy. Her family had killed his father. His family had killed her grandfather, her uncle, her cousin Jacob, who died when she was 12, and yet he had helped her without hesitation. "Why?" she asked suddenly. "Why did you really help me?" Dalton was quiet for a long moment, his back to her as he arranged his bedroll. When he finally spoke, his voice was low. "Because I am tired of watching people die over land that will outlast all of us. Because my father's death did not bring back your uncle, and your uncle's death did not bring back my great-uncle, and all we have done is create more graves and more grief." He turned to look at her, and in his eyes she saw a weariness that went bone deep. "Because maybe if I save one Ramsey, it will balance out some of the Kincaids who have died." "That is not how it works," Felicity said. "I know, but it is the only reason I have." They looked at each other across the small cabin, and Felicity felt something shift in her chest, some small crack in the wall of hatred she had been taught to maintain. This man was not a monster. He was just tired, like she was tired, of a war that had started before either of them were born. She lay down on the bed without taking off her dress, too exhausted to care about propriety. The last thing she saw before sleep claimed her was Dalton sitting by the fire, his rifle across his lap, keeping watch. When she woke, sunlight was streaming through the cabin's single window, and the smell of coffee filled the air. Dalton was at the table, cleaning his rifle with careful, methodical movements. He had already made breakfast, johnny cakes and beans warming by the fire. "How long did I sleep?" Felicity asked, sitting up. "Most of the day. It is almost noon." He did not look up from his work. "I went out at dawn and scouted the area. There were trackers on the ridge last night, but they turned back north like I thought they would. We are safe for now." "For now," Felicity repeated. She stood and moved to the fire, pouring herself coffee from the pot. It was strong and bitter, exactly what she needed. "They will not stop looking for me." "No, they will not. Your cousin is dead. They will want blood for blood. So what do I do? Hide up here forever?" Dalton finally looked up at her, his dark blue eyes serious. "You have 3 choices. You can go back and face whatever justice your family decides to deliver. You can run far away from here, start over somewhere where no one knows your name. Or you can stay here while we figure out a third option." "What third option?" "I do not know yet. But there has to be a way to end this that does not involve more dying." He set down the rifle and stood, and Felicity was again struck by the sheer size of him. He was not just tall, but powerfully built, with the kind of strength that came from years of hard living in the mountains. "Eat, then we will talk." They ate in silence, Felicity sitting at the table while Dalton leaned against the wall. The food was simple but good, and she found herself wondering how long he had lived like this, alone in the mountains, separate from the feud that had consumed both their families. "Tell me about your family," Dalton said when they had finished eating. "Not the history I already know. Tell me about who they are now." Felicity considered this. "My father is William Ramsey. He owns 3,000 acres south of the ridge, most of it grazing land. He runs cattle and horses. He had 4 children. My brother Michael, who is 26. My sister Sarah, who is 24. Me, and my younger brother James, who is 19. My mother died when James was born. I am sorry. It was a long time ago." Felicity looked down at her hands. "My father has never been the same since she died. He became harder, angrier. He blamed the Kincaids for everything that went wrong, said that if he had not been fighting with your uncle over water rights, he would have been home when my mother went into labor. Could have gotten the doctor in time. That is not how childbirth works, I know, but grief makes people irrational." She looked up at him. "What about your family?" "My mother is Martha Kincaid. My father was Daniel Kincaid, before your father killed him. I have 2 brothers, Duncan, who is 32, and David, who is 28. Duncan runs the family ranch now, about 4,000 acres north of the ridge. David helps him. I spend most of my time up here, trapping and hunting, selling furs in Silver City." He paused. "My mother has never recovered from my father's death. She keeps a loaded rifle by the door and sleeps with a pistol under her pillow. She is waiting for the day the Ramseys come to finish what they started." "We are all waiting for something," Felicity said quietly. "Waiting for the next fight, the next death, the next reason to hate each other." "Yes." They fell silent again. But it was a different kind of silence now, heavy with shared understanding. They were both prisoners of a war they had not started and did not want. Over the next few days, they fell into a routine. Dalton would wake at dawn and go out to hunt or check his trap lines, leaving Felicity alone in the cabin. At first she was nervous, jumping at every sound, but as the days passed she began to relax. She cleaned the cabin, organized his supplies, even did some mending on his clothes that needed repair. It gave her something to do besides think about what she had done, about the fact that she had killed a man, even if it was in self-defense. Dalton would return in the late afternoon with game or fish, and they would cook together and eat. Then they would talk. At first the conversations were stilted and careful, both of them avoiding the minefield of their shared history. But gradually they began to open up. Dalton told her about growing up in the shadow of the feud, about watching his father ride out again and again to confront the Ramseys over boundary disputes and water rights and insults both real and imagined. He told her about the day his father died, how he had begged him not to go, how his father had said it was a matter of honor. "Honor," Dalton said bitterly, "as if there is any honor in dying over a fence line." Felicity told him about her own childhood, about the fear that was always present, the knowledge that violence could erupt at any moment. She told him about her cousin Jacob, who had been shot by a Kincaid when she was 12, and how his death had hardened something in her father. "I think that is when I started to question it all," she admitted. "Jacob was only 17. He was kind and funny and he wanted to be a teacher, and he died because he was in the wrong place at the wrong time, caught in the crossfire of an argument he had nothing to do with. My uncle died the same way," Dalton said. "Wrong place, wrong time. He was not even involved in the fighting. He was just trying to bring his cattle in before a storm." They looked at each other across the cabin, and Felicity felt that crack in her armor widen a little more. This man understood. He had lived through the same grief, the same senseless loss. On the 5th night, as they sat by the fire after dinner, Dalton asked her about Thomas. "You said he tried to force you to go back. What did you mean?" Felicity stared into the flames. "I was trying to leave. I had packed a bag and was planning to take the stage to Santa Fe. I thought if I could just get away from Silver City, away from the feud, I could start over. Thomas found me on the road and told me I was being a coward. That family came first. When I refused to go back with him, he grabbed me. We struggled and I pulled out my pistol. I told him to let me go, but he would not listen. He said I belonged to the family, that I did not get to choose." Her voice cracked. "So I shot him." "You did what you had to do," Dalton said firmly. "No one has the right to force you to do anything, family or not. My father will not see it that way. He will see it as betrayal. And Thomas's father, my Uncle Robert, will want revenge. Then we make sure they do not find you." Felicity turned to look at him. "Why are you doing this? You have already done more than I had any right to expect. You could turn me over to your family, use me as leverage to end the feud in your favor, or you could just send me away. Why do you keep helping me?" Dalton was quiet for a long moment, the firelight playing across his strong features. When he finally spoke, his voice was rough with emotion. Because for the first time in my life I feel like I am doing something that matters. All my life I have watched people die over this feud, and I have felt helpless to stop it. But you came across that ridge and gave me a chance to choose something different, to choose peace instead of war, to choose to protect instead of destroy. He looked at her, and the intensity in his eyes made her breath catch. You gave me a reason to hope that maybe this can end. Felicity felt something warm unfurl in her chest, something that had nothing to do with the fire. She realized with a start that she trusted this man, this Kincaid who should have been her enemy. More than that, she was beginning to care for him. I feel the same way, she admitted. When I am with you, I do not feel like a Ramsey, I just feel like myself. They sat together in the firelight, not touching but closer than they had been before, and Felicity felt the beginnings of something she had never expected to feel. Happiness. The next morning, Dalton returned from his trap lines with news. I saw Duncan yesterday, he said without preamble. I told him I needed to talk to him alone. We are meeting tomorrow at the old copper mine, the one that has been abandoned for years. What are you going to tell him? Felicity asked, her heart suddenly racing. The truth, that I have been helping a Ramsey woman who killed her cousin in self-defense, that I believe we can use this situation to finally end the feud. He will never agree to that. He is a Kincaid. He will want my blood. Duncan is not like our father. He is practical. He knows this feud is destroying both our families. If I can convince him that there is a better way, he will listen. Dalton moved closer to her, and she could feel the warmth radiating from his large body. But I need to know that you trust me, that you believe I will not let any harm come to you. Felicity looked up at him, at this mountain of a man who had risked everything to help her. I trust you, she said, and she meant it. Dalton reached out and touched her face, his calloused fingers gentle against her cheek. I will protect you, Felicity, with my life if necessary. The use of her first name sent a shiver through her. No one had called her by her first name in days. It made everything suddenly more real, more intimate. Dalton, she whispered, and then he was kissing her. His lips were warm and firm against hers, and Felicity felt like she was falling and flying at the same time. His arms came around her, pulling her close, and she could feel the solid strength of him, the power barely restrained. She kissed him back with all the pent-up emotion of the past week, all her fear and hope and desperate need for connection. When they finally broke apart, they were both breathing hard. Dalton rested his forehead against hers, his hands still on her waist. I have been wanting to do that since the first night, he confessed. So have I, Felicity admitted. But I thought I was crazy. We are supposed to be enemies. We are supposed to be a lot of things. But right now, in this moment, I just want to be a man who cares about a woman. He pulled back enough to look into her eyes. I care about you, Felicity, more than I should, more than is wise. But I cannot help it. I care about you too, she said, her hand coming up to touch his scarred face. You are the first person in my life who has ever made me feel like I matter more than my last name. They kissed again, slower this time, exploring. Felicity had been kissed before by boys in Silver City who had been brave enough to risk her father's wrath, but none of those kisses had felt like this. This felt like coming home to a place she had never been. When they finally separated, Dalton took a step back, clearly trying to regain his composure. I should go prepare for tomorrow's meeting with Duncan. We will need a plan. They spent the rest of the day strategizing. Dalton would tell Duncan about Felicity, about what had happened with Thomas, and propose that they use this situation to broker a peace between the families. If Duncan agreed, they would approach William Ramsey together and offer a trade. Felicity's life in exchange for an end to the feud. Your father will never agree, Felicity said. He would rather see me dead than make peace with the Kincaids. Then we will have to convince him that the alternative is worse, Dalton said grimly. If Duncan and I stand together, if we show both families that we refuse to continue the cycle of violence, maybe it will be enough, and if it is not, then we run. We take the horses and head west, start over in California or Oregon, somewhere far enough away that the feud cannot follow us. He took her hand in his much larger one. I will not let them kill you, Felicity, I swear it. The next morning, Dalton left before dawn to meet Duncan at the old copper mine. Felicity spent the day pacing the cabin, unable to sit still. So much depended on this meeting, on Duncan's willingness to consider peace. When Dalton finally returned in the late afternoon, his face was grim, but not defeated. Duncan agreed to meet with your father, he said. But there are conditions. Your father has to come alone, no brothers, no cousins, and we meet on neutral ground at the church in Silver City. Father will never come alone, Felicity said. He will if he wants to see you alive. Duncan is sending a message to him tonight, telling him that we have information about what happened to Thomas, about who killed him and why. If he wants the truth, he comes to the church in 3 days, alone and unarmed. Felicity felt her stomach drop. 3 days. That is all we have to end a 43-year-old feud. It will have to be enough. Dalton pulled her into his arms and she pressed her face against his broad chest, drawing strength from his solid presence. We can do this, Felicity. Together. Over the next 3 days, they prepared. Dalton went over every possible scenario, every argument they might face. He taught Felicity how to defend herself better, showing her how to reload her pistol faster, how to use her smaller size as an advantage in a fight. But mostly they talked, planning and hoping and trying not to think about all the ways this could go wrong. They also grew closer. In the evenings after their planning was done, they would sit by the fire and talk about other things. Dalton told her about his dreams of owning his own ranch someday, far from Silver City, where he could raise horses and live in peace. Felicity told him about her love of reading, how she had always wanted to see the ocean. When this is over, I will take you to California, Dalton promised. We will stand on the beach and watch the sun set over the water. When this is over, I will hold you to that. Felicity replied, and they kissed until the fire burned low. On the night before the meeting, they made love for the first time. It was gentle and fierce all at once, Dalton's large hands careful on her body despite his obvious strength. Felicity felt safe in his arms, cherished in a way she had never experienced before. Afterward, they lay tangled together on his bed, her head on his chest, listening to the steady beat of his heart. No matter what happens tomorrow, I want you to know that these past days with you have been the best of my life, Dalton said, his hand stroking her hair. Mine too, Felicity whispered. I love you, Dalton Kincaid. I love you, Felicity Ramsey. And I will love you no matter what our last names are. They held each other as the night deepened around them, drawing strength from each other for what was to come. The next morning they rode into Silver City together. Dalton had borrowed a horse for Felicity from his brother, and they approached the town from the north, keeping to the less traveled roads. The church sat at the center of town, a simple wooden structure with a cross on top. It was neutral ground, holy ground, the one place where violence was universally forbidden. They arrived early, and Dalton positioned Felicity in the church's small sacristy where she could hear everything but remain hidden. Stay here until I call for you, he instructed. No matter what you hear, do not come out until I say it is safe. Be careful, Felicity said, gripping his hand, always. He kissed her quickly, fiercely, then went to wait in the main chapel. Duncan Kincaid arrived next. He was taller than Dalton but leaner, with the same dark hair and strong features. He nodded to his brother but said nothing, taking up a position on the left side of the church. They did not have to wait long. William Ramsey entered precisely at noon, his footsteps echoing on the wooden floor. Felicity had to bite her lip to keep from making a sound. She had not seen her father in over a week, and the sight of him brought a complicated rush of emotions. He looked older than she remembered, his hair grayer, his face more lined. He was not alone. Her brother Michael stood behind him, and Felicity's heart sank. Her father had not followed the conditions. You were supposed to come alone, Duncan said sharply. I do not take orders from Kincaids, William replied, his voice hard. You said you had information about Thomas's death. I want to hear it. Dalton stepped forward, and Felicity could see her father's hand move toward the gun at his hip. We know who killed Thomas, Dalton said calmly, and we know why. But before we tell you, we need you to listen to the full story. I do not need to listen to anything from you, William spat. Your family has been lying to mine for 43 years. And your family has been lying to mine, Dalton countered. This feud started over a misunderstanding and has been perpetuated by pride and stubbornness. How many more people need to die before we admit that? My brother is dead, Michael said, stepping forward. Thomas was murdered on our land. We want justice. Thomas was killed in self-defense, Dalton said. He was trying to force someone to do something against their will. When they refused, he became violent. The person who shot him had no choice. Who? William demanded. Who killed my nephew? Dalton looked toward the sacristy, and Felicity knew it was time. She took a deep breath and stepped out into the chapel. The look on her father's face would haunt her for the rest of her life. Shock, betrayal, rage, all flickering across his features in rapid succession. Michael actually drew his gun, but Duncan was faster, his own weapon already pointed at Michael. "Nobody moves," Duncan said quietly. "We are in a church. We are going to talk this through like civilized men, Felicity?" William's voice was strangled. "What have you done?" "I defended myself," Felicity said, walking forward to stand beside Dalton. She felt his hand brush against hers, a silent offer of support. "Thomas tried to force me to go back home when I was trying to leave. He grabbed me and would not let go. I warned him and he did not listen, so I shot him." "You killed your own cousin." William looked like he had been struck. "You murdered a member of your own family." "It was not murder. It was self-defense. Thomas gave me no choice." "You had a choice. You could have come home with him. You could have been obedient like a daughter should be." William's voice was rising. "Instead, you ran to the Kincaids like a coward." "I ran to save my life," Felicity shot back. "And Dalton saved me when my own family would have killed me." "Dalton?" William's eyes narrowed as he looked between his daughter and the mountain man beside her. "You call him by his first name?" "I love him," Felicity said, and she heard Michael's sharp intake of breath. "And he loves me. And we are asking you, both our families, to end this feud, to let the killing stop." For a long moment, no one spoke. Then William laughed, a harsh, bitter sound. "You think love can end 43 years of blood? You think I will forgive the family that killed my father, my brother, just because my daughter has forgotten where she came from?" "I have not forgotten anything," Felicity said. "I remember every death, every funeral, every time we lived in fear because of this stupid feud. I remember crying at Jacob's grave and wondering why he had to die. I remember my mother dying alone because you were off fighting with the Kincaids instead of being with her." Her voice broke. "I remember all of it, Father, and I am telling you it has to stop." "Your mother's death was their fault," William said, pointing at Duncan and Dalton. "If they had not been pushing their cattle onto our land, if I had not had to defend what was ours—" "Mother died in childbirth," Felicity interrupted. "It had nothing to do with the Kincaids. You just needed someone to blame because you could not blame yourself." William's face went red. "How dare you speak to me like that? Because someone has to tell you the truth." Felicity took a step forward. "This feud is killing us, all of us. Not just with bullets but with hate and fear and wasted lives. How many more of us have to die before you admit that?" "She is right," Duncan said quietly. All eyes turned to him. "I have been running the Kincaid ranch for 16 years, and in that time I have lost 2 cousins, an uncle and my father to this feud. I have a wife now and a son who is 3 years old. Every day I wonder if today will be the day the Ramseys come for him. Every night my wife sleeps with a rifle beside the bed. That is no way to live." "So what are you proposing?" Michael asked suspiciously. "A truce," Dalton said. "We agree to stop the killing. We establish clear boundaries for our properties and we respect them. We trade in Silver City without violence. We live our lives without looking over our shoulders." "And what do we get in return?" William demanded. "My nephew is still dead. And my father is still dead," Dalton replied. "And Felicity's grandfather and my great-uncle, and all the others who have died because of this feud. We cannot bring them back, but we can stop creating new graves." "The law says Felicity should hang for murder," Michael pointed out. "The law says it was self-defense," Duncan countered. "Thomas was killed on disputed land while trying to force someone against their will. No jury would convict her, and you know it." William was silent, clearly struggling with himself. Felicity could see the war playing out on his face. Pride versus pragmatism, hate versus love for his daughter. "Father, please," Felicity said softly. "I do not want to lose you, but I will not give up Dalton. I will not go back to living in fear. If you cannot accept that, then I will leave and you will never see me again." "You would choose him over your family?" William asked, his voice breaking. "I would choose peace over war, love over hate, life over death." Felicity moved to stand directly in front of her father. "Dalton has shown me more kindness in the past 2 weeks than anyone in my own family has shown me in years. He protected me when he could have used me. He listened to me when he could have dismissed me. He offered me a future when all I could see was death." Tears were streaming down her face now. "He gave me hope, Father. Can you not see how precious that is?" William looked at his daughter for a long moment, and Felicity saw something shift in his eyes. He reached out and touched her face, his hand shaking. "You look so much like your mother," he whispered. "She would be proud of your courage, even if I cannot be." "Then be proud of me now," Felicity pleaded. "Help me end this." William turned to look at Duncan and Dalton, his face hardening again. "If I agree to this truce, I want terms. Clear boundaries, legally documented. No Kincaid sets foot on Ramsey land without permission, and vice versa. Any disputes go through the territorial court, not through guns, agreed, Duncan said immediately, and Felicity. William swallowed hard. If she chooses to marry this man, she is no longer a Ramsay. I cannot have a Kincaid in my family. Felicity felt like she had been slapped, but Dalton's hand found hers and held tight. If that is your price for peace, we will pay it, Dalton said. But know that you are losing a remarkable daughter. I lost her the moment she crossed the ridge, William said bitterly. But then he looked at Felicity again, and his expression softened slightly. But perhaps it is better to lose her to love than to death. At least this way I know she will be cared for. I will spend the rest of my life caring for her, Dalton promised. You have my word on that. Michael, who had been silent throughout most of this exchange, finally spoke up. What about Thomas? Does his death go unpunished? Thomas brought about his own death, Duncan said firmly. He used violence and was met with violence. That is the lesson of this entire feud. If we continue to seek blood for blood, it will never end. Michael looked like he wanted to argue, but William held up a hand. Enough. Duncan is right. If we pursue this, Felicity will hang and the Kincaids will retaliate, and we will be right back where we started. He took a deep breath. I agree to the truce. We will draw up the papers with the territorial judge and make it legal. The tension in the church broke like a snapped string. Felicity felt her knees go weak and Dalton's arm came around her waist, supporting her. It was done. The feud was over. Duncan and William shook hands, both men looking uncomfortable but determined. Michael nodded stiffly, clearly not happy but willing to follow his father's lead. There is one more thing, Dalton said. Felicity and I want to be married, here in this church with both families present. We want to start our life together with everyone's blessing, not in secret. William's jaw tightened, but after a moment he nodded. If that is what she wants, it is what I want, Felicity confirmed. They set the date for 2 weeks hence, giving both families time to adjust to the new reality and for Duncan to draw up the legal documents that would formalize the truce. As they left the church, Felicity felt lighter than she had in years. The weight of the feud, the constant fear and anger, had been lifted from her shoulders. She looked up at Dalton, at this strong, brave man who had risked everything for her, and felt her heart overflow with love. We did it, she whispered. You did it, Dalton corrected. You were the one who was brave enough to cross the ridge. I just followed where you led. They rode back to the cabin together, but now it felt different. This was no longer a hiding place but a home, the beginning of their new life together. The next 2 weeks were a whirlwind of preparation. Felicity had to return to her father's house to collect her belongings, a tense and awkward visit that left her emotionally drained. Her sister Sarah was the only one who seemed genuinely happy for her, hugging her tightly and whispering that she was proud of Felicity's courage. You did what the rest of us were too afraid to do, Sarah said. You chose your own path. Felicity met Dalton's mother Martha for the first time, a nerve-wracking encounter that went better than expected. Martha was a stern woman, weathered by grief and hardship, but she looked at Felicity with something like approval. You have backbone, she said. That is good. My son needs a strong woman, not some delicate flower who will wilt at the first sign of trouble. I am not delicate, Felicity assured her. No, you are not. You killed a man and survived. You crossed enemy territory and convinced my sons to make peace. You are exactly what this family needs. Martha took Felicity's hands in hers. Welcome, daughter. Felicity felt tears prick her eyes. She had thought that leaving the Ramsay family would mean losing a mother figure, but here was Martha, ready to fill that role. The wedding took place on a clear October morning, with both families in attendance. The church was packed, Ramsays on one side and Kincaids on the other, eyeing each other warily but peacefully. The territorial judge was there as a witness, along with most of Silver City, curious to see this unprecedented union. Felicity wore a simple white dress that Sarah had helped her make, with wildflowers in her hair. As she walked down the aisle on her father's arm, she could see Dalton waiting for her at the altar, dressed in a new black suit that made him look even more imposing than usual. His eyes were locked on her, filled with such love and devotion that she felt her breath catch. William gave her away with obvious reluctance, but he did it, and that was what mattered. Felicity took Dalton's hand and they turned to face the preacher together. The ceremony was short and simple. They exchanged vows, promising to love and cherish each other for as long as they both lived. When the preacher pronounced them husband and wife, Dalton kissed her with such tenderness that Felicity forgot about everyone watching, forgot about the feud and the fear and everything except the feel of his lips on hers. As they walked back down the aisle together, hand in hand, Felicity saw something she had never expected to see. Ramses and Kincaid standing together, not fighting but celebrating. It was not perfect. There were still hard looks and obvious tension, but it was a start. The reception was held at the hotel in Silver City, the largest space available. Duncan had arranged for food and drink, and despite the awkwardness, people slowly began to relax. Felicity watched as her brother James tentatively approached Dalton's brother David and struck up a conversation about horses. She saw her father and Martha standing in opposite corners of the room, not speaking but not actively hostile either. "It will take time," Dalton murmured in her ear as they danced their first dance as husband and wife. "Old wounds do not heal overnight." "But they will heal," Felicity said confidently. "We will make sure of it." They spent their wedding night at the cabin in the mountains, Dalton carrying her over the threshold, despite her laughing protests that he would hurt himself. "You weigh nothing," he said, setting her down gently inside. "I could carry you for miles and not get tired." They made love with the fire crackling and the stars visible through the window, and Felicity had never felt more complete. This man, this mountain of strength and gentleness, was hers now, and she was his, and together they would build a life that had seemed impossible just a few weeks ago. In the months that followed, the truce held. There were rough patches, moments when old hatreds threatened to resurface, but Dalton and Felicity stood firm, a living symbol of what was possible when people chose peace over war. Duncan and William formalized the property boundaries, working with the territorial court to create legal documents that clearly defined who owned what. Disputes were settled through law rather than violence, a novel concept that took some getting used to but ultimately worked. Felicity and Dalton built a house on the edge of Kincaid land, close enough to the mountains that Dalton could continue his trapping, but also accessible to Silver City. It was a beautiful spot, with a view of the ridge where Felicity had crossed that fateful night, a constant reminder of how far they had come. Felicity's relationship with her father remained strained but slowly improved. William visited their new house a few months after the wedding, ostensibly to check on some property matter, but really, Felicity suspected, to see how she was doing. He stood in the doorway looking uncomfortable until Dalton invited him in for coffee. They sat at the table, the three of them, and talked about crops and weather and the price of cattle. It was mundane and awkward and wonderful. When William left, he shook Dalton's hand and nodded to Felicity. "You have a good home here," he said gruffly. "Your mother would have liked it." It was not forgiveness, not quite, but it was acceptance, and that was enough. Felicity discovered she was pregnant in the spring of 1880. She told Dalton one morning as they lay in bed, the sun streaming through their window, and watched his face transform with joy. "A baby," he breathed, his large hand coming to rest gently on her still flat stomach. "Our baby, are you happy?" Felicity asked, though she could already see the answer in his eyes. "Happy does not even begin to cover it," Dalton said, and he kissed her with such reverence that tears sprang to her eyes. The pregnancy was healthy and uneventful, and on a cold December morning, Felicity gave birth to a son. They named him Daniel William, honoring both their fathers, and when William came to meet his grandson, he wept openly. "He looks like you did when you were born," he told Felicity, holding the baby with surprising gentleness. "Same nose, same chin. He has Dalton's eyes," Felicity pointed out, and it was true. Little Daniel had inherited his father's dark blue gaze. Martha was equally smitten with her first grandson, and to everyone's surprise, she and William struck up a tentative friendship over their shared grandchild. Felicity would sometimes find them sitting together on the porch, Martha knitting and William whittling, talking about the baby, or the weather, or nothing at all. "Who would have thought," Dalton said, watching them from the window. "A Ramsey and a Kincaid, sitting in peace. We started something," Felicity said, leaning against her husband's solid warmth. "A new history to replace the old one." As the years passed, their family grew. 2 years after Daniel came another son, whom they named Thomas, in memory of the cousin whose death had started everything. It was Felicity's way of acknowledging that even tragic events could lead to transformation and healing. Their daughter arrived 3 years later, a fierce little thing with auburn hair and her mother's green eyes. They named her Grace, because it seemed fitting for a child born from forgiveness. The truce between the Ramseys and Kincaids evolved into something more like friendship. The families began to help each other during difficult times, sharing resources during droughts and labor during harvest. Intermarriages became more common as the younger generation saw Felicity and Dalton's example and dared to hope for their own cross-family romances. James Ramsey married David Kincaid's daughter in 1885, cementing the bond between the families even further. Sarah Ramsey married a merchant from Santa Fe and moved away, but she visited often and always made a point of telling Felicity how proud she was of her. Duncan's son grew up playing with Daniel and Thomas and Grace, and the children of both families attended the same school in Silver City, learning together instead of being taught to hate each other. The ridge that had once been a battlefield became a favorite picnic spot for the families, a place where they could gather and remember what they had overcome. Felicity and Dalton's marriage only deepened over time. They faced challenges, as all couples do. Harsh winters, failed crops, illness, and loss. But they faced them together, drawing strength from each other and from the love that had brought them together. On their 10th anniversary, Dalton took Felicity to California, just as he had promised. They stood on the beach and watched the sun set over the Pacific Ocean, their fingers intertwined. "Did you ever imagine this?" Felicity asked. "When you found me that first night in the mountains, did you imagine we would end up here?" "I imagined that you were the bravest woman I had ever met," Dalton said, "and that if I did not help you, I would regret it for the rest of my life. I was terrified that night. I thought you would kill me." "I was terrified too. I thought you would run, and I would lose my chance to change things." He pulled her close, his strong arms wrapping around her. "You changed everything, Felicity. You were brave enough to cross that ridge, and you changed the course of 2 families, of an entire community." "We changed it together," Felicity corrected. "I crossed the ridge, but you caught me when I fell. You protected me when you could have destroyed me. You chose love when hate would have been easier." They kissed as the sun dipped below the horizon, painting the sky in shades of gold and pink and purple. It was a perfect moment, a culmination of all the choices they had made, all the risks they had taken. When they returned to Silver City, it was to find that William had suffered a heart attack. He survived, but the experience changed him. He became softer, more willing to express affection for his children and grandchildren. He spent his remaining years doting on Daniel, Thomas, and Grace, telling them stories about their grandmother and about the old days before the feud had consumed everything. When William died in 1892, both Ramseys and Kincaids attended his funeral. It was a testament to how much things had changed that no one thought this was strange anymore. Martha outlived William by 5 years, passing peacefully in her sleep at the age of 73. At her funeral, Felicity gave the eulogy, speaking about a woman who had known great loss but had chosen to embrace peace and welcome a former enemy as a daughter. As Felicity and Dalton entered middle age, they became the respected elders of both families, the living embodiment of reconciliation. Young couples would come to them for advice, and they would share their story, always emphasizing the importance of courage and choosing love over hate. Their children grew into fine adults. Daniel became a lawyer, working to establish fair laws in the growing territory. Thomas took over the ranching operation, combining the best practices of both the Ramsey and Kincaid families. Grace married a teacher and opens a school in Silver City that welcomed all children, regardless of their family background. On their 25th anniversary, the families threw a huge celebration in Silver City. Nearly everyone in town attended, multiple generations of Ramseys and Kincaids mingling freely. Speeches were made, toasts were offered, and Felicity found herself overwhelmed with emotion as she looked around at all the people whose lives had been touched by the choice she and Dalton had made so many years ago. 25 years, she said to Dalton as they danced under the stars. "Can you believe it? Every single one of them has been a gift," Dalton replied. His hair was gray now, his face more lined, but he was still the strong, protective man she had fallen in love with. "You are still the most beautiful woman I have ever seen, and I still fall in love with you more every day. You are still the mountain man who saved me," Felicity said, resting her head against his broad chest. "My protector, my partner, my love." They danced until the music stopped, until the guests had gone home, until it was just the two of them under the stars. Then they walked hand in hand back to the house they had built together, to the life they had created against all odds. New Mexico achieved statehood in 1912, and Felicity and Dalton were invited to the celebration in Santa Fe. They traveled there with their children and grandchildren, a whole tribe of Kincaids and Ramseys who no longer saw any difference between the two names. As they watched the American flag being raised over the new state capitol, Felicity thought about how far they had all come, from a land divided by blood feuds to a state united under one flag. From families who could not speak without fighting to families who chose to build together. "We helped make this possible," Dalton murmured in her ear. "This peace, this unity, it started with us." "It started with love," Felicity corrected. "And it will continue with love, through our children and their children." They lived to see their golden anniversary, 50 years of marriage celebrated by a community that had been transformed by their love. The celebration was even bigger than their 25th anniversary, with people traveling from all over New Mexico to honor the couple who had ended the bloodiest feud in Silver City's history. Felicity and Dalton sat in chairs of honor while their children, grandchildren, and great-grandchildren performed a pageant telling their story. It was both hilarious and touching, watching the youngest generation act out the moment when Felicity had crossed the ridge and Dalton had chosen to help her rather than hurt her. When the pageant was over, the mayor of Silver City presented them with a proclamation, declaring their anniversary a town holiday. "You taught us that peace is always possible," he said. "That love can overcome even the deepest hatred. You are an inspiration to us all." Felicity cried happy tears as Dalton held her hand, his grip still strong despite the arthritis in his fingers. That night, in the privacy of their bedroom, Dalton helped Felicity undress, his hands gentle on the buttons of her dress. They had both aged, their bodies bearing the marks of 70-plus years of life, but to each other they were still as beautiful as they had been that first night in the cabin. 50 years, Felicity said, settling into bed beside her husband. 50 years of love and laughter and life, and I would do it all again, Dalton said, pulling her close. Every moment, every challenge, every joy. I would choose you every single time. I love you, Dalton Kincaid. I have loved you since the moment you chose to protect me instead of destroy me, and I love you, Felicity Kincaid. You are the bravest, strongest, most incredible woman I have ever known. They fell asleep in each other's arms, the way they had every night for 50 years, secure in the knowledge that they had lived a life filled with love and purpose. Dalton passed away peacefully in his sleep 2 years later at the age of 75. Felicity woke to find him gone, and though she grieved deeply, she also felt grateful. They had had more than 50 years together, a lifetime of love and partnership. He had lived to see their children succeed, their grandchildren marry, and their great-grandchildren born. At his funeral, attended by hundreds of people from all over New Mexico, Felicity stood strong and spoke about the man who had changed her life and the lives of so many others. "Dalton Kincaid was the strongest man I ever knew," she said, her voice clear despite her tears. "But his greatest strength was not in his muscles or his size. It was in his capacity for love, for forgiveness, for choosing peace when war would have been easier. He saw a frightened woman on his land and chose to protect her. He saw an opportunity to end a cycle of violence and chose to take it. He saw a chance for love and chose to embrace it." She looked out at the crowd, at the mixture of Ramseys and Kincaids and others, all united in their grief. "He taught us all that we can choose who we want to be, regardless of what history tells us we should be. That is his legacy." Felicity lived for 3 more years after Dalton's death, surrounded by her loving family. She spent those years writing down the full story of how she and Dalton had met and fallen in love, how they had ended the feud and built a new future. She wanted future generations to know the truth, to understand that peace was always possible if people were brave enough to reach for it. On a warm spring morning in 1931, Felicity Kincaid passed away in her sleep at the age of 74. She was buried next to Dalton on a hillside, overlooking the ridge where their story had begun. The ridge that had once been a boundary between enemies, but was now just a beautiful part of the landscape. At her funeral, her grandson read from the manuscript she had left behind, the story of a woman who had crossed a ridge and a mountain man who had ended a war. It was a story of courage and love, of 2 people who had dared to imagine a different future and had made it real. The feud between the Ramseys and Kincaids became a footnote in history, a cautionary tale about the cost of hatred. But the love story of Felicity and Dalton became legend, passed down through generations as a reminder that even the deepest divisions can be healed by love and courage. Their descendants continued to thrive in New Mexico, carrying on the legacy of peace and unity that their remarkable ancestors had begun. The house that Felicity and Dalton had built together became a historical landmark, preserved as a testament to their story. The ridge where Felicity had crossed became known as Peace Ridge, a popular hiking destination and a symbol of the transformation that was possible when people chose love over hate. In the center of Silver City, a statue was erected showing a young woman and a mountain man standing together, their hands joined, looking toward the future. The plaque at the base read, Felicity Ramsey Kincaid and Dalton Kincaid, who proved that love is stronger than hate and peace is always possible. Their story was taught in schools throughout New Mexico, an example of how individuals could change the course of history through courage and compassion. Children grew up learning about the feud that had torn apart Silver City and about the brave couple who had ended it, who had shown everyone that another way was possible. The legacy of Felicity and Dalton lived on in countless ways, large and small. In the marriages between former enemy families that became commonplace. In the legal system that replaced violent retribution with fair trials. In the community organizations that brought people together instead of dividing them. In the simple fact that Silver City became known as a place of peace and prosperity rather than violence and vendetta. But perhaps their greatest legacy was in the love they had shared, a love so powerful that it had transformed not just two people but entire families, a whole community, and ultimately contributed to the peaceful development of a state. They had proven that it was possible to break free from the chains of history, to choose a different path, to build a future based on love rather than hate. And in that choice, in that single moment when Felicity had crossed the ridge and Dalton had chosen to help her rather than harm her, they had changed the world. Their story became a beacon of hope, not just for their own descendants but for anyone who faced seemingly insurmountable divisions, anyone who wondered if peace was possible, anyone who needed to believe that love could triumph over hate. It was a story that reminded people that courage could come from unexpected places, that a single act of kindness could ripple out in ways that transformed generations, that choosing love was always worth the risk. Felicity and Dalton Kincaid had lived and loved and died, but their story lived on, eternal and inspiring, a testament to the power of the human heart to overcome even the deepest wounds and build something beautiful from the ashes of hatred. They had crossed the ridge together, ended a war together, and built a love that had literally changed history. And in the end, that was everything.